These initiatives support Canada's overarching objective of helping Haiti build back better and stronger given security and stability, serve as a foundation for Haiti's long-term development and prosperity.
That's the Foreign Affairs Minister Lawrence Cannon. He was promising Haiti about $10 million for a new police headquarters. Since last year's earthquake, Canada has been one of the leading donors to help Haiti with rebuilding and also with outbreaks of cholera, as we've seen, and HIV/AIDS. But critics charge that Canada is letting down the regions of Africa, which have been hardest hit by the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Let me show you the hot sheet on that. There are 33 million people afflicted with HIV/AIDS worldwide. 2/3 of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. And in that African AIDS hotspot, 1.4 million people died in 2008 alone. It's an astonishing figure still. Given the size of the ongoing humanitarian disaster, has Canada, as some have said, abandoned parts of Africa in its time of need? Joining me now is the former Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin. Mr. Martin, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Mr. Martin, one of the key things that you focused on is this Give a Day to World AIDS Group. It's on the economic future of Africa. You're giving a speech on this next week. And you know, there's so many issues that we've talked about, the economy, but this issue sometimes gets, frankly, dusted under the carpet a bit. Why is this so important?
Well, you know, it probably is the greatest plague that we have seen, and certainly in modern times, if not ever. I mean, 27 million people have died, 33 million people have AIDS. But if, in terms of Africa, and it mostly sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, it is an absolute tragedy. You think that 90% of all of the new incidents of children under the age of 15 are in sub-Saharan Africa. And when you go into the medical clinics, or you go into a very small hut, or in rural Botswana or in rural Mozambique, and you see, where a mother has died, a child has been orphaned, and the brother or the sister has AIDS, it just rips you apart. But the fact is, there's a good news package here, and that is that the incidents are down by 25% from their peak. In other words, we really are making progress. And what Give a Day really says, and this is a Canadian initiative directed towards African communities primarily, it's saying, that we can really make a difference. If you're prepared to give up a day's salary, then we can really, eventually we will beat this disease. And I just got to say, there can't be very many things more important than that.
There's some concern, and I'm filtering this through the loss of Canada's seat on the UN Security Council, that Canada has essentially abandoned Africa. The government says it's actually increased aid to Africa, but some of that aid will end in 2010, and they've decreased the number of programs. Does Canada have a role to play on the HIV/AIDS outside of this Canadian-driven initiative?
Well, this is really a private sector initiative. This is really Canadian communities. This is a Dr. Jane Philpott, who had this idea from the Markham Hospital. She had spent a lot of time in Africa, and she's reaching out to individual Canadians to ask them to give a day's salary. So this is really Canadian community to African community, and I think we have a tremendous role to play in there. We have a huge history with Africa that goes a way back, and despite the fact that the government did cut aid to Africa, which was really wrong, I think that the relationships between ourselves and the African people are very strong. And let me just say that, that the countries that have been hit by it, Botswana is one of the best run countries, not just in Africa, in the world. Mozambique, the president, I worked very closely with the former president who won the Mo Ibrahim Prize for one of the best, for one of the best African leaders in recent history. There's really very solid reasons for supporting this. Unfortunately, AIDS has really taken hold in some of those African countries where you have the best governments, and there is a real opportunity to turn this around if, in fact, Canadians come to the fore.
But, Mr. Martin, Give a Day to World AIDS is, as you say, it's a program, very important program, but it's private initiative driven. Do we need these kind of initiatives to dovetail on a more robust engagement across Africa on a government level to deal with HIV/AIDS?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if your question is, should the Canadian government be much more front and center and involved, absolutely we should. And there's another reason. If you take a look at where all aid money, not for AIDS, but just overall has gone, well, it's gone obviously to deal with poverty, and that's what it should. But now an enormous amount of the world's poverty is in some of the emerging economies, like places like India and China, who are in a position to do much more themselves. And for us not therefore to focus on the continent with the most fragile states and the greatest amount of poverty, which is Africa, simply would make no sense. I think there's a real chance here, and this is, you know, sometimes people say it's all futile. They say we can't do anything. The fact is we are beating AIDS, but we're not going to beat it unless in fact the effort continues and grows, because this is not one of these things where you can simply turn off help or you can reduce help and think that you're going to continue to beat it.
There are concerns, interestingly enough, and tragically, about HIV/AIDS spreading now in Haiti since the earthquake. Before the earthquake, there was about 120,000 people with HIV living in Port-au-Prince, one of the hardest hit areas. Since the quake, hundreds of thousands of people have migrated away from the capital, and some NGOs are worried that the HIV/AIDS crisis throughout the rest of the country is spreading. Does this program deal with Haiti at all? And perhaps maybe on a broader level, I know you know these areas well, what can Haiti do, what can Canada do to prevent Haiti from becoming an Africa?
Well, the Give a Day program focuses on AIDS. And quite naturally, it therefore focuses on Africa, because this is where, you know, 2/3 of the incidence, if not 3/4 of the incidence of AIDS are. But it focuses on AIDS, and what you just said occurs in Africa, or in Haiti. Unfortunately, you know, shouldn't surprise you, because AIDS follows poverty, as does most disease. And in fact, not only does it follow it, but poverty in fact increases the incidence, because the kinds of activities that take place happen when people are desperate. And of course, you know as well as I do that AIDS has a woman's face. And they're the poorest people in all of these countries, and they certainly are the people who are suffering the most in Haiti.
Mr. Martin, you know, you and I have talked over the last number of years about your involvement with First Nations groups here, of course, in Africa on various issues about HIV/AIDS. The Liberal leader, Michael Ignatieff, came out yesterday or the other day calling Canada's loss of the UN Security Council seat an embarrassment. Your involvement on the international stage has clearly been so profound. What's your view of that? Has this been a serious blow to Canada? What do you think's behind that?
Oh, yeah, yes, I think it has. I don't think that that is an exaggeration, and it really does come from, you know, turning our back on Africa. I don't want to be partisan. These are issues which are too great. But the fact of the matter is, we are not playing the role in Africa that we once played. We're not playing the role around the world that we once did, whether it's climate change or any other. And I think that the rest of the world is reflecting this, and I think that's what happened at the United Nations. And I think that they sent us a message, and I would hope very much that the government's going to listen to that message.
But what do you say? People are listening to this and they say, didn't the government increase aid to Africa?
Well,
how is that abandoning Africa?
Well, the fact is that we increased aid to Africa and made a commitment at the Gleneagles Summit, and we had a firm baseline, and I knew as a finance minister, a former finance minister, that baseline was going to shift and would probably it might well reduce our ultimate goal. So I said, look, this is our goal. We're going to double the aid regardless of the baseline. Well, what happened is, of course, the baseline shifted, and the current government took advantage of that baseline to say we're going to reduce our aid, and it was just wrong to do that. But look, I don't really think we should get involved in this discussion when we're dealing with something that's so important with AIDS. I think the basic question that you asked at the very beginning is that we have this tremendous Give a Day program, which is community to community, Canadian to African or to others who have AIDS. But primarily, I think it's the Stephen Lewis Foundation and Dignitas International that would be the recipients. And these are institutions led by outstanding Canadians. Stephen Lewis himself, James Orbinski, the former head of Medicine Sans Frontières. Yeah, what I think the basic point is that you raised is, if the Canadian people are doing this, shouldn't their government be there with them? And I think you're right. I think they should.
Paul Martin, I appreciate you coming in today talking about this very important community initiative. Once again, your passion with your poppy worn very clearly.
Well, thank you for giving me this chance to talk to you.
Former Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin. For the record, by the way, there is an NDP-sponsored bill in the House that would help bring cheaper medicines to developing countries, including those that treat HIV/AIDS. And while Paul Martin has attacked the government, as you just saw their record on it, the Liberal Party is not unanimous in its support of this bill, as some have called for it to be. So this is an issue that cuts across party lines. Still ahead on